All right, guys, here we are. Even cheerful Shannon grumbled about these pests. These tiny little varmints are more troublesome than mosquitoes, ticks, and gnats combined, he complained. It's bad enough they eat me alive. Why do they have to wake me up in the night to devour me? I think I slept better on the prickly pears back at the Great Falls. It doesn't seem to freeze out here in the winter, so the fleas don't get killed off, Coulter said. You just have to ignore them, Shannon, or you'll scratch your skin raw, like poor Seaman is doing. The men looked at Seaman. Excuse me. Where was I? The men looked at Seaman. Here it is. Who was scratching his side with his hind leg. The dog jumped up and then plopped right back down to scratch the other side. Day after day he scratched. He rolled onto his back and slid along the rough boards to scratch his itchy skin. He dug through his fur, his snout, trying to bite off the itchy little creatures. Sometimes he chewed off clumps of hair, exposing raw patches of skin. Sacagawea rubbed grease on the sores, but Seaman licked off the grease and chewed off more fur. The winter weather at Fort Clatsop was either damp and drab or wet and gusty. Although it was never very cold, it was also never very sunny. Between early December and late March, the explorers counted only 6 days of fair weather and only 12 days without rain. Most days the hunters went out in search of game. They returned with damp clothes and wet moccasins. Seaman's coat got soaked when he went hunting with the men because the ground was always soggy and the trees dripped. Usually the hunters brought back elk, so most of the meals at Fort Clatsop were elk. Boiled elk, dried elk, jerked elk, and sometimes spoiled elk. In 3 months the explorers consumed 131 elk. When the men returned home from hunting, they hurried to smoke any extra game before it started to spoil. As winter wore on, the hunters killed all the game nearby countryside. The captains had to trade with the Clatsop Indians to finish roots and dog meat to add to their food supplies. My dogs just came in. I'm recording. When the men weren't hunting, they spent their days inside the damp fort scraping elk hides, sewing moccasins for the return trip. The stoking of the smokehouse fire. For outdoorsmen, these were real boring tasks. The gloomy skies made everybody feel gloomy. Even Seaman padded through the fort with a drooping tail. The men complained of colds, flus, and muscle strains. Much of the captain's time at Fort Clatsop was taken up with their writing. They sat on the rough benches, bent over crude desks, and wrote by candlelight. Seaman stretched out the floor in the captain's quarters and watched them drip their quill pens into bottles of ink and scratch them across the pages and pages. Lewis described plants and animals and Indians. Clark made a careful map of the lands that they had traveled through. He estimated that they had covered over 4,000 miles from the mouth of the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. His estimate was based on the daily count of the miles by dead reckoning, by comparing the distance from one point to the next based on a similar but known distance. Have you noticed how well the Indian hats shed water? Lewis said to Clark one day as he sat in their quarters writing. He was describing the hats in his notes. They're so tightly woven that the water rolls off the cedar bark. It's like I'd like to have one of those hats. Clark laughed. Watch out. It will probably cost you more than you want to spend. Come here. We got a visitor. The Clatsops do charge awfully steep prices, Lewis said, shaking his head. They always get the better deal in a trade. But at least they're honest, Clark said. When the Chinooks came to our camp to trade, they were always stealing things. I came to our camp. I haven't heard any of our men complaining about the Clatsops stealing from the fort. The Clatsops have some admirable qualities. They know how to make wonderful canoes, Lewis continued, reflecting aloud. about the tribe. Of all the Indians we've met, they seem the most peaceful. Their young men don't show any interest in fighting among themselves with the neighboring tribes. But some of their customs puzzle me, Meriwether. Lewis nodded. You're thinking about the way that they flatten their babies' heads by keeping them between the boards? Yes, Clark answered. It puzzles me that the Clatsops would consider a flattened head more beautiful. It also puzzles me that they admire stout legs on their women, so much so that they tie cords around their women's ankles to cause their legs to swell. Lewis grinned mischievously. I take it you're not planning to show your lady friend Miss Julia how to thicken her legs by binding her ankles, Lewis teased. When we get back to the United States. As soon as Lewis mentioned the name of the young woman, Clark's face turned as red as his hair. To hide his embarrassment, Clark quickly dipped his pen into his bottle of ink and stooped over the map that he was drawing. Seaman heard the playful tone in Lewis's voice and scrambled to his feet. He patted over to Lewis, a pine cone in his mouth and a tail wagging hopefully. All right, Seaman, Lewis said, taking a pine cone. Let's go outside for a while. I think William might prefer to be left alone. He cleared his throat. Alone to watch the map of his heart. Lewis chuckled at his own joke, closed his ink bottle, and skipped out of the door of the captain's sleeping hut with Seaman romping beside him. Clark kept his eyes on his paper, but the corners of his mouth curled into a little smile. On these gloomy days, he did catch himself feeling a bit homesick. And when his thoughts wandered toward the United States, he found himself picturing a young woman he hoped to marry. The Clatsop Indians often came to the fort, and the explorers visited nearby Indian villages. The Clatsop lived in wooden houses divided into rooms for related families. When Seaman went with the men into the Indian village, he was welcome in the Indians' dim, smoky houses. The houses smelled like fish because the Clatsops ate mostly fish, rather than meat. Large decorated baskets filled with roots and seeds lined the walls of the house. The likable, easygoing Indian braves invited the explorers to play games, gamble, and smoke with them. Seaman dozed beside the men or retrieved sticks thrown by the Indian children. One day, the Indians brought news to the fort. A whale... Oh, goodness. Let me pause for a second. One day, the Indians brought news to the fort. A whale had washed ashore. The captains decided to send a group to the coast to see the creature and bring back some meat. Captain Clark wanted to lead the group. Sacagawea asked if she could go along on the trip. Her face fell when Clark said no. Janie, he explained, you and Little Pomp will be safer here. We're going to take the canoe over to the coast, and a storm might blow up at sea. Your baby is only 11 months old. He could slip off your back in the rough waters. You remember how strong the waves were at Point Ellis? Remember how seasick you got riding over the waves? Sacagawea stood silently, looking at Clark. Seaman brushed against her leg, but she ignored him. Puzzled, Seaman sat and watched the Indian woman's face and her ears cocked. Besides, Clark continued, we'll want big, strong men to butcher the whale carcass and haul the meat back to camp. I think it very hard to refuse me, Sacagawea said. I have traveled a long way to see the great waters, as far as any of the men, and I have done my share of the work. Now there is a monstrous fish to be seen. I wish very much to see it. The captain's eyes met. This was the first time the Indian woman had insisted about anything. She had traveled as far and worked as hard as any of them. Perhaps more so, because she carried her little child on her back, and it did seem mean to deny her request. Ooh, look at this picture, y'all. Lewis nodded at Clark, and then he spoke. Janie and the baby have been on the canoes when we rode through some very rough rapids. She's been level-headed in plenty of risky situations. I think she and Pomp will be safe at the seacoast, Lewis said. This will probably be her only chance to see the Pacific Ocean, Lewis added. You take Seaman along with you. He'll keep an eye on Pomp if the waves swamp over the boat. As a matter of fact, Seaman would probably enjoy a romp by the ocean. He got his name because he was meant to go to sea, and he hasn't been to the actual seacoast yet. Clark agreed, and the party set off. They found a whale on the sandy beach near the creek on Tillamook Head on January 8th. By the time they got there, the whale's blubber had already been removed by the Indians, but the huge skeleton lying on the sand was an impressive sight. "Look at this creature," Clark exclaimed. "It's bigger than a house." Seaman ran around the carcass, growling at its strange odor. He sniffed the whale's mouth and tugged at chunks of sandy skin. Then he rolled the wet sand covering over his own scent with the odor of the Dead Sea. Captain Clark paced out of the length of the skeleton and declared it was 105 feet long. The explorers walked around the carcass amazed. They measured the thickness of the whale's bones by comparing them with the sizing of their hands. They knelt in the sand and brushed off the big tail to admire it. Seaman wiggled inside of the whale's ribs and barked playfully at the men. Pomp watched the dog from his clean, dry perch on Sacagawea's back. He laughed aloud when Seaman tunneled around the skeleton and dashed past, flinging wet sand behind him. The men visited local Indians to barter for blubber and whale oil. Sacagawea walked along the shore with Seaman. From the beach, the gray, cloudy sky seemed endless. Out in the deeper water, waves rolled and crashed. Yet when the same waves neared the shore, they grabbed softly at the wet sand under Sacagawea's bare feet. She stood facing the open ocean, thinking about the large world. She wondered if she was the first Shoshone woman who had been at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Seaman splashed into the shallow water and pawed at a crab tumbling into the waves. Sacagawea smiled and slipped Pomp off her back, and she held the baby at the edge of the water. He kicked his feet, squealing at the cold, moving water. Seaman dashed over, kicking and spraying water into the air, and nuzzled Pomp's face. The big dog turned and leaped into the waves and grabbed a long ribbon of seaweed. He shook his head, waving the kelp in the air. Pomp laughed. Seaman turned and ran back to Pomp, dragging the seaweed. When the slimy kelp brushed against Pomp's hands, he grasped and started to cry. Sacagawea giggled and playfully splashed Seaman. Seaman dropped the seaweed and ran in a big circle around Sacagawea and Pomp, spraying water all over them. Clark called to them. Sacagawea put Pomp in his cradle board and joined the group. The men had brought about 300 pounds of blubber and oil back to Fort Clatsop. Clark cut off a chunk of the pink-white blubber and offered it to Seaman. He wagged his tail, drooling, and swallowed the whole piece in one gulp. Clark was very pleased with their whale of an adventure. In his journal he wrote, "Thank Providence for directing the whale to us, and think him much more kind to us than he was to Jonah, having sent this monster to be swallowed by us, instead of swallowing of us as Jonah did." That's a reference to the Bible, the book of Jonah and the whale, or the story of Jonah and the whale. The explorers were delighted to have a new food to vary their daily menu. They thought the blubber was very tender with a slightly sweet taste. Shannon declared it was better than dog meat. York said the blubber tasted even better than beaver. By March, the explorers were restless to be moving again, but they hoped the winter snow and ice along their inland route had begun to melt so that the travel would be easy. The men knew that they would have to haul their canoes up the Columbia's rapids as they had to reach the Rocky Mountains before the short summer in the high country was over. Once past these obstacles, they would be in rich beaver and buffalo country of the plains, and then they would be nearing St. Louis and home. The captains were disappointed that they had not made contact with the seagoing vessels at the coast. That meant that the Corps of Discovery would start home in a state of poverty, with only a handful of trade goods. But staying longer at Fort Clatsop would not help the situation, since the local Indians refused to lower their prices, even though the expedition had almost nothing left to trade. During their last season of travel, the explorers had deposited several caches of supplies along their route. If those caches had not been raided, the captains hoped to pick up some supplies and trade goods as they traveled.